Oh, it's a windy day out right now. Kind of hard to tell with the camera, but it is. And I've got a lot of stuff on the ground that I've got to clean up. Got to remember that this might be a hayfield. I don't usually cut this one, but I have. It's a little bit weedy. Needs to get cut some more. But after the trees are down, that's when the work begins. You know, typical. Saws I have on the tractor today are my venerable 70E because it just starts easy and runs nice. And junk pile saw because it's actually earned a spot in that roster as well for good performance and good behavior, you know. This is one that we took down that day Bob was here. And then take a look at that big old maple right there. That's going to be a fun project, right? We yanked the branch out of it so it's pretty safe. There's a lot of trees back there that need to come down, you know. If I want to develop that into a better woodlot, I have to take the cullwood out first. And but today I have to clean up the sticks right here, and I need to split that wood over there. I might have to noodle some of it so I can actually lift it. I've gotten to a point in my life where I've learned that it's not worth killing yourself to pick that stuff up, you know. Yeah, this is the rest of the story because what you usually see on videos is just the saw time, you know. Lots of noise and lots of chainsaw action, but not the cleanup work afterwards. You know, one of the things I want to point out is, if you remember, that saw is the one that I put together with a junk pile bunch of parts. I used it in the how to put bearings in cases as a prop, and I also did my junk pile saw build out of it. If you remember, that's the OEM original edition style 50mm top end, where I'd put an aftermarket cheap piston where I'd file the top down by the transfer ports, kind of like the West Coast company Madsen used to do years ago. And I can't tell you how many people go, you can't do that, it's not going to work. You're going to get hot spots in the piston, all this crap about all this stuff that's going to happen based on online expertise. And I just want you to think about that as you watch this saw go through these logs. Because noodling is about as hard on a saw as you can get, short of actually milling with a saw, because of the long cuts. And the other thing I want you to think about while you're watching this is the exit of my exhaust, where I have it up and to the right underneath the chain brake handle, and how as you get into the bigger chunks like that, how that affects the direction of the exhaust relative to your face, the chips as well. So this is really actually pretty informative. Number one, gives you a sense of reality of what really is critical with the saw, and also gives you a sense of what you can get away with, I guess is another way of putting it, versus everything having to be just perfect in order to have a reliable saw. But yeah, just think about all that. If you think about that piston, think about that file, how imprecise it was and how good that saw runs. And a little bit of spin on the knowledge that you get online. So a lot of this stuff just simply isn't that critical. Well, we moved a little further along. Hopefully today we're going to have a chance of setting this one up here. Got to put one more board on the header right there before we can set this one. And then once we have that set, we can measure to get an exact length for the next piece. I've been jumping the gun. I've been getting a lot of the firewood up here. And that's one load. There's another load and a half right there. And I'm going to go out in the woods and get some more. And then been skidding wood up here so I have wood to cut. Should the weather turn, we can't get back out into the woods, and I want to test some saws. I got these up here, and you saw me skid them up in one of the videos if you're paying attention. But this is my ride today. So I gotta fill it up with gas and oil. Ran through a tank, and been blocking these things. You know, it's kind of funny. I had a friend. I said, "What are you doing that for?" Because in years past, I would have just picked those things up and tossed them into that trailer. After having a knee issue and a hip replacement, because I've been stupid for a long time, I've decided to make it a habit of breaking them down to things that I can actually lift and easily without any strain or pain. Now, having said that, and obviously this is about the rest of the story, about processing the firewood and cleaning up the mess created by dropping some of these trees. I can't wait to take that one down. That's going to be so much fun. Damn. Kind of like trail riding. Instead of my motorcycle and the trails, it's a chainsaw and those trees. Been saying that for years, but I want to formalize that as a concept. Guys don't get it. While you run an inefficient old saw, you know, it's not getting the job done when you have those other tools, you know. I hear that crap all the time. Well, I want to enjoy the work. But one of the discussions that comes up from time to time is why are the chainsaws these lower tech piston port versus the higher tech two-stroke designs like you see on motorcycles and snowmobiles and all that, where they get a lot more power per cubic inch out of those motors than they do out of a chainsaw motor. Well, the discussion actually is broken down into a couple of things. One is the cost of design, the cost of manufacture of the entire product line to keep the price point to where people can afford them. So obviously the more complex the design you have on a motor, the more cost, right? The second is the physics of the weight. You don't want to carry around a water-cooled motor. It's too heavy. And the third is they actually get enough power out of those designs really, where you really don't need all that sophistication, you know? And a subset of that discussion is heat, you know? When you burn gas and air, it creates heat. Obviously, the more efficient the motor is, the more that heat gets turned into rotary motion, which turns the chain. All those motors are somewhat inefficient, you know? Arbitrarily, let's say it's like 50% efficient, and I don't think it's even close, but let's say it is, for the sake of argument. That means 50% of the energy being burned in that gasoline is turned into heat that has to get taken away through the fins, the air cooling and stuff like that. Now, when you have a more efficient and more sophisticated design, and you generate more power, you might have somewhat more efficiency, but you still have more heat. The more gas and air that you can push into that system and burn, the more heat it's going to create. And the air-cooled designs allow a certain amount of power reliably. And when you put more power into that amount of cooling capability, now you're beginning to heat the system up to the point where you might have problems. And we saw that was like the early 562s and some of the other saws, where they had to do better heat management because the system as it was couldn't manage the heat well enough throughout the entire saw system in order to be a reliable saw. The heat soak with the carburetors and things like that. Well, Husqvarna eventually tweaked things to solve the problem. I used to do things to the muffler and to the covers to get the heat out. But if you think about it, that really is the lowest common denominator to these designs. Based on the amount of weight they want to have in their saw, and based on the amount of power they need, they got to come up with a compromise to where they make enough power, but the system is light enough. And the 800-pound gorilla in that room is how much heat they have to rid themselves of in order to have a reliable saw. And I think this video right here is kind of relevant because you're watching my saw push heat out the exhaust at a fairly high rate, blowing chips out of the way, by the way, because of the angle and orientation. And because that saw has basically a fan on the flywheel, fins on the cylinder, and also an open exhaust, and it can make decent horsepower and obviously enough to noodle that log reliably. It doesn't get so hot that the oil fails and the thing sticks. Are you sort of getting the drift here? So the reason why a system like that wouldn't want a more sophisticated design in the intake or even the expansion chamber type things is because on those sustained cuts, you add that much more power into the system, you better have the ability of getting rid of the heat. Otherwise, you bring the temperature of the overall saw system to a point where lubrication fails or nylon melts in the bearings and things like that. The saw basically is too hot to run reliably. And to you guys who go out there and build 10 horsepower hot rod saws on the same cooling system, that's something for you to think about. When you're working it for, say, 5 minutes at a get-together, maybe even 10, that may not be a problem. But you go tank after tank after tank, cutting in less than ideal conditions on a hot day, and you start having things like mud and oil and bar oil and stuff like that start caking on the fins to start taking away its ability to rid itself of heat, you're asking yourself for a problem. And the saws, as they come from the factory, the engineers have thought about that. So they have a cooling system on that saw that's capable of handling what they consider the performance envelope of a typical saw in a logging condition, where the combination of the dirt and the power required and all those things, they still can cool it enough where under a sustained cut it doesn't just quit, doesn't die because of heat-related issues. But that really is the reason why you don't see more sophisticated designs in the motors, because right alongside of that they'd have to come up with a more sophisticated cooling system, and that adds weight, that adds complexity, that adds price. And why would they do that when they can have a simple piston port design that makes good enough power, and they can cool it reliably and make it for a price point that people can buy? So I know that's a long way of defining a lot of parameters, but those are the kind of things that determine whether or not that saw is going to be some really sophisticated cylinder design like a Yamaha 125 road racer, you know, versus a very simple quad port, you know, 70cc single cylinder two-stroke, which is really simple. Doesn't make a lot of power per cubic inch as compared to some of those more sophisticated two-strokes out there, but it makes enough, and it cools itself well enough for, you know, a wide range of service conditions, and can be made for a price point we all can afford. So hopefully that makes some sense. I think I'm going to add this little lecture into this video. I think they've done a good job. I think what's going to happen to the chainsaws, instead of seeing more sophisticated engine design, I think we're going to see batteries. That's the next thing for me. I hate to say it, but thank God that they haven't gone the route of the motorcycles where they had more weight to play with, you know, because you're carrying it around in a frame versus in your hands. And then instead of having the little 125s that I used to have as a kid, they went to the 250 4-strokes to make the same kind of power. And all that weight, all that complexity on the altar of clean air, the politics of it. And so far we haven't seen that with the saws. You know, we see the designs that try to squeeze more efficiency out of them, like the 562 Husqvarna and the, you know, the new steels and things. But beginning to ramble. I hope you get the point. Piston port makes enough power, and they can cool them, and they can make them cheap, and that's why they are the way they are.